Welcome to the All Ambient podcast, where we dig into the creative process, hear untold stories, and explore some of the brilliant minds behind some of the finest ambient music out there. My name is Mike Graff. I make music as Dear Gravity. I'm really glad that we're in this together, and here we go. Video podcast episodes are a thing. If you're listening to us on audio, we're still going to keep delivering in that format, but we're excited to make that transition and the host of opportunities that opens up, not only for you to get to see the faces behind the music, but to also explore different ways, tutorials, teaching podcasts, ways that we can grow in this whole thing together. So here we go. We're giving it a shot. I think it's going to be great. We'll figure it out. So on today's music news edition of the All Ambient podcast, we dig into some of the changes that have happened around Spotify's release radar. For those of you who are in that space, there are some interesting things that have happened and might affect one way or another the ways that the artistry is approached. It was really great to dig into it together with Kirk, Ben, and Marshall. And we're going to get right to that in a second. Before we do so, if you have not joined the All Ambient Discord server yet, please do it. There's a really great conversation going on there. The community is great. It's growing each and every day. And not only can you meet a whole bunch of other great artists and learn things from each other, but if you have any questions or any feedback or any requests for the future of the podcast, there are channels in the Discord server for you to do that very thing. So come check us out there. And of course, head over to all-ambient.com. Not only can you license music from all the great artists in the All Ambient family, which will be continuing to evolve in the coming weeks and months here, but there's going to be a lot more that's rolling out over the course of 2025, so don't miss out. Sign up for email news alerts, follow All Ambient on social channels, and you're going to want to see what's going on. We're excited. I hope you are too. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into today's conversation on music news. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of the All Ambient podcast, the music news edition of the All Ambient podcast. And clearly, if you are tuning in on YouTube, you've figured out that we have made the jump from an audio-only podcast up to the video side. So we're still figuring a couple things out. You guys all look great. Yes, you do. Every single one of you. But
thank you.
Thanks for hanging with us while we're still figuring out how to do all this stuff. But as always, guys, Ben, Marshall, Kirk, really, really glad that we are here together. Hi, guys.
Yes, sir. Happy to be here.
Hello.
Man, all the spaces look so great. Marsh, tell me, is that guitar that's hanging right behind you, is that the Jazzmaster that we have created a bunch of stuff together? No.
Yes.
That's not.
Yes,
it is.
Yeah. Doesn't look as gold as it is in the light here, but yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. It's my main guitar that I track with, so it sounds excellent.
Is your studio space, and I'm trying to figure it all out too, is your studio space pleasant enough for your guitar to not like freak out at the fact that we both live in places that have very cold winters and very warm summers and all that fun stuff?
Good question. I don't know. I feel like I've lived here long enough to maybe not know the right answer to that question. Sure. Like, is this how it's supposed to be, or is it not how it's supposed to be? But I can generally like leave them out, and some stay in tune quite well.
Yeah.
So, but at this point, it's kind of like that's the normal.
Right.
That's the normal thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just, at some point, I swore by humidifying all of them in their cases and all that stuff. But at some point I was like, man, I don't ever play them when they're just sitting in my closet. And so I'm just chuck them on here and get the action adjusted and all that fun stuff when I got in. We'll just figure it out. So all is well. It's great.
Yeah, man.
It's great. Kirk's got your whole collection floating over there. Man, I'm seeing there's the Strat down on the floor, and then you've got...
Yeah, that's my main guy, the Strat.
Now, I know that you've been working on some singer-songwriter stuff. Have you been doing it with the approach being an electric sort of thing, or what does that feel like?
When I'm practicing a lot, and it's electric that I'm practicing on. But it's weird because it's all like cage stuff, and it's all very leady. It's either like learning lead lines and all the pentatonic boxes and shapes, or it's like doing jazz chords, which I don't know if I'll use a lot of jazz chords, but it's helping me see the fretboard. And so that's all electric. But when I'm like writing, it's all mostly acoustic stuff. And so I'm trying to make myself learn songs and then just experiment with chords. But that's when I'm practicing, it's like I'm practicing to be a lead player. But when I'm working on songwriting stuff, I'm just doing regular chords,
Right.
So yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I'll go back and forth between electric to learn lead and then acoustic to get my rhythm together.
Yeah, man, you're already a melody writing boss, but with all that lead work, I'm
excited.
Yeah.
When I first discovered like there's major pentatonics on the piano, and I was like, oh, everything sounds good no matter what you do. And then I just remember all the guitar guys being like, yeah, pentatonics. I was like the blues? Like, is that what? And it's like, well, yeah, but it's so much more. And so now that I'm getting to be comfortable with pentatonics on the guitar, I'm very excited about what may happen.
Oh, that's awesome. Love it. Ben, I know that you are in a little bit of I don't think makeshift is the right way to say it, but you and your whole family, you and Anita and your kiddos, you guys are planning on, we're moving in a couple, or no, are you guys moving where you're living and moving studio space, or just moving studio space in a couple months?
So we'll be
both,
moving.
the whole thing.
Yeah, it's and we haven't signed on a new property yet.
Sure. Yep.
But we will be doing so hopefully over the next few weeks. If we don't find something, then we've got a bit of kind of flex in terms of our timings. But yeah, it will be moving our house.
Weeks.
Yeah, things go quickly.
Man.
You're like, this is the property, and we're like, yes. And then it's like, yeah, you sign it and you kind of basically get it, and you've got a month's notice on your own place, and so you're like, okay, then we do it. And then you get the packers in, the movers in, you do all of that stuff. But yeah, as you say, like we've kind of got stuff in two separate spots, so at home and then also here it's a decent space, but it's not like a super ideal studio, hence the screen, and it's a lot of kind of storage stuff over here, so that's why I'm keeping it relatively concise on the camera. But there is quite a lot of stuff here which we will eventually kind of bring back home and have a more dedicated kind of studio space, which is just like set up exactly kind of how we want it. It's exciting, but
that's awesome.
it's a little daunting, if I'm honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and you were telling me that and some of it just coincides with like when you move studios, you kind of just rethink the setup and all that. But I know you've been talking a little bit about, okay, it's probably time to look at sort of building the whole, your whole signal chain from the ground up all over again. And those are great things to do, and obviously comes with a whole bunch of positive results and makes you even that much more able to create what you create to an even higher degree. But man, it's a time consuming thing, I guess, is probably the best way, a very gentle way to put it. And for me, it's accessing a whole bunch of brain space and using brain calories that I very much do not normally do. And it just, what you think takes hours winds up taking weeks, and you're just like, oh yeah, man.
Yeah. It's a lot. And yeah, you're right. Like that's part of the excitement of kind of moving the space, is saying, okay, we're going to do some stuff kind of from scratch. I've got things in here which, I've had for 10, 15 years, and they've always worked. And so I've been like, well, fine, what's the point? But at the same time, you're kind of like, okay, now it's got to a point where some of those things are starting to break a little bit, and you're like, okay, that cable probably is broken, so you get rid of it. But then you realize it's not the cable, it's actually something else that's causing interference, and et cetera, et cetera. And you guys all know that the spiral continues until you realize actually there's a lot of issues and a lot of things that ultimately just need to be scrapped, recycled, or whatever, and started from scratch. And from our side, we kind of try to keep it relatively minimal, because we do know that we will be moving every 3-4 years.
Sure.
So the setup it's not like having a massive studio with everything kind of set up. It is still like most of the stuff is in the box, having some, decent mics, a really good audio interface and all that kind of thing. So it's not quite as daunting than it might be, but it's still like, okay, got to do the research on everything, and haven't done that research for 10 years, and things have shifted a long way in that time.
Yeah.
So it's exciting, but yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, it is what it is.
I'm with you. It was about a year ago when we talked about it on the round table quite a bit, making the move to the new Mac. And
oh my gosh, has it been a year?
It's just, yep.
Yeah.
But I think I made you guys promise me that you would not let me do it again for another decade, because it was just, thing after thing after thing.
And now the new Mac Mini is like blows all of our computers out of the water, you know.
Yep. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, it's
Appreciate
like that's what always happens though.
Yeah, of
That's on
course
my
it
list.
is. Of course it is. Yeah, hey, why get twice the computing power for 20% of the cost, and you're just like,
They know what they're doing.
Thanks, Apple. It's great. It's great. Oh, so much fun. Well, hey, there's always things going on in the music industry, and we are here to talk about a couple of said things, and I've got something that I want to throw at you guys. But before I do that, Ben, I know that you mentioned that you had something that you wanted to float by us, and I would love to just hand it off to you for a little bit, and we can kind of chew through what you've got.
Yeah, it was something that I came across actually on a YouTube channel that I follow, a guy called Andrew Southworth, who has some really interesting stuff to say. But it tallied basically with something that I was seeing as well with our releases, which is there was some weirdness going on with Release Radar, with some tracks seemingly, and some releases doing really well, some basically not appearing at all. And I was like, okay, what is going on? So when I saw this show up, I was like, okay, I need to see if there's any kind of official explanation here. And yeah, it kind of digging through it with his experiences, and then also something which has happened more recently, which is Spotify actually posting an article on Spotify for Artists detailing exactly what is going on. I thought it would be worth kind of just essentially reading that out, and you guys can, share thoughts. It impacts us, I would say, in some senses, but it's more from a strategy perspective rather than, okay, oh wow, we're all going to get hit by a lot of negativity here and from the algorithm. So it's just kind of worth knowing and bearing in mind when you're coming up with track titles, honestly, and just release strategy. So yeah, these are the things that on the Spotify for Artists website, if you search Release Radar Spotify for Artists, this article will come up. It says things to keep in mind. So we know this: deliver your music at least 7 days before release to get your music on Release Radar in the first week. They say now, which I think is a little bit tenuous because I'm not sure this is completely true, but they say that we don't include a song in a listener's Release Radar if they've already listened to it, but we might include another song from the release. It's definitely true that other songs from releases do seemingly show up now in Release Radar. They only include songs in Release Radar when you're a main or featured artist, not a remixer. So if I do a official remix of one of your tracks, Antarctic Wastelands fans will not see that. Or not order for them in Release Radar. They don't include songs by various artists as the artist name. They don't include re-releases of songs already on Spotify, which I think has always been the case. Now, and here's some really important stuff. We do not include some alternative versions of tracks, like acoustic, karaoke, or live versions. And we do not include remixes. Each listener only gets one song per artist per week, and will include a song for up to 4 weeks if a listener hasn't heard it. So most of that stuff I think we kind of knew or had inferred from how things were performing. The thing which I think is the biggest shift is that they are not including alternative versions of tracks like acoustic, karaoke, or live versions. And sorry, I misspoke earlier. They do still include remixes. So official remixes do show up, but of course only to the main artist, not the remixers.
Right. Yep.
Followers. So remixes are kind of like, maybe it's worth it. Now, having said all of that, on my Release Radar today, there was a ton of tracks which were in brackets rework. So maybe rework at the moment is still kind of, the word rework is still filtering through. But I would say, just in conclusion at all of this, if one is trying to kind of at least play the Release Radar algorithmic game, consider retitling tracks rather than calling them reworks. Because typically with what we're doing, it is essentially a new track, and it's not a remix in the traditional sense of the word. And yeah, that would be my initial thoughts, but very kind of curious to hear what you guys have to say as well.
Yeah, and I want for all of us to chime in on it. My gut reaction at the time, and I think there's several things to kind of clue in on here, but my gut reaction is that this probably will do a good job of weeding out the people who are releasing many versions of the same song just for the sake of spiking an algorithm. Like trying to take advantage of the system is maybe not the best way to put it, but to try to use the metrics that are available to them and the opportunity they have to do this, that may be more of a momentum choice rather than like an artistic choice. And so I see how this could potentially hurt someone who, I mean, even, I just finished putting out my early years project at the end of last year, and there were, some piano and strings reworks of stuff. There were plenty of remixes on that and all that stuff. And I know that the numbers were perhaps maybe not as high on some of those different versions that I wanted them to be, but I wanted to do it as an artistic, I wanted to reimagine a handful of songs from, a decade ago that it just breathed some new life into them. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. So it wasn't a let's spike the algorithm possibly choice. It was a let's put out this cool piece of art. So I could, for every person that maybe has to rethink here's how I do the release and here's that, I do see it serving Spotify well, weeding out some of the people who are just in it to game the system. And I know that there's kind of a sliding scale there, and it's not a bad thing to take advantage of opportunities when they're available. But yeah, I think for those who are just really there to game it, I don't mind weeding out some of that. So, my 2 cents.
It makes me think of, I remember Deadmau5 talking about just remix versus rework. And this was kind of almost before rework was like a word that was around. And he was always just to me, remix is just you do a mix and the bass is louder, and you do a mix and the drums are quieter, and they used to, I know in different radio formats, they would have different mixes that would be specifically for radio formats. So you'd have the hot AC, and you'd have the rock version and all this kind of stuff. And that was so that you could deliver something to a format that wants this specific thing, and you might not even know that the other versions exist if you didn't listen to those stations, And so when he was okay, remix is just weird, he didn't like that idea. And so rework was kind of I want to make this almost brand new, to where there's integrity of the song, where there's whether it's a lead melody or it's a kind of a chord progression, that might be recognizable, but other than that, it's almost what is this, And that was okay, that feels like a new thing. And calling it rework, it's you're trying to say this is where it came from, and it's not just turning the guitars up or doing a thing and then putting it back out. But then you'd see things where in the EDM world they would put out an EP and it would be one song with 5 tracks. But a lot of time those tracks were wildly different, And so it would almost be oh, this is really cool. This is awesome, and they were really just trying to bring attention to the song. But a lot of times things were wildly different. And somehow the remix would pop off more than the original song,
Mm-hmm.
Or thinking that song, The Pill in, I Took a Pill in Ibiza. The remix of that song was way bigger than, and then there's acoustic versions. And so there's I think sometimes it's it's a valid artistic exploration of a song that you love, and it's a brilliant marketing strategy, because now I don't have to write 5 songs. I just have to write one song and then find people to interpret it in creative ways. But then there's sometimes where there's an EP of that one song, and it feels more like they just muted everything and then put out the acoustic version, and then they just added strings and printed it, and it did the string, and now it's it's a 5-song EP. And it feels like almost the same song remixed different ways. Where it's
literally
volume.
the same minutes and seconds. It's the same timestamp, and
And so it's it's kind of whatever. I think at the end of the day, if people really believe in a song, they're going to do what they can do to try to get ears on it, and if that's putting together an EP with 5 tracks that are all different, then I get it. And if it's doing that thing, or if it's something where you're trying to serve these markets, radio markets, then I kind of understand it. But when you're doing kind of the collaborative thing that we do, is almost I have this material that I love, and I'd love to see what you did with it. And what you do with it is it's almost just like a diving board into this whole new thing. That's where it feels like it makes sense to give it a new title. Yeah. And the strategy of that is like, yeah, we're basically just handing things off and making all new work. And so having more content is good. More things that are done are good, and you don't necessarily have to bring it back to this one song title. You can spread it out. That's a strategy in itself. It's just a different strategy of getting more stuff out into the world.
Yeah. Marsh, you got thoughts?
Do I? Yes. This is interesting to me because I feel like the context of this whole conversation around release radar is great. And I feel like there's been definitely times where I know there's an artist that I'm a fan of that has something release, and I'm looking for it in my release radar and it's not there. I'm kind of like, why isn't this there? You listen to these guys frequently and stuff doesn't pop up, this and that. It's kind of cool to hear some of those, potential reasons why that's happening. I feel like the bigger conversation of just like, how is this informing creative choices, is just kind of the thing that we all, I know, constantly battle with and overthink, and you think of all the outcomes and this and that. So, and even just thinking of like, I don't know, it just feels so almost silly to just be like, is this going to be a remix or is it called a rework? Like, I don't, I want to do this the right way so that it gets into the right thing and the right people hear it. And it's almost just like, what is the bigger picture there? I don't know. None of us know really, but I think as the landscape, if you will, kind of continues shifting and everything, it's just some of the points and like some of these articles seem so just relatively small, but also seems like it may influence how somebody strategizes their whole release, for an EP, or, how we want to title our tracks, and how, just like we've talked about with the tracks that we've worked on together, and how, what kind of artists and this and that. So I just find that to be, still very interesting. I think what we're doing is kind of like, we do the best we can, staying like true to the things that we kind of like believe in and create as artists, and why we love to make music, and then also kind of keeping these things in mind, I think is kind of the best you can do. It's just so interesting to me to just have like these little articles come out and just be like, oh, crap, now I need to rethink how I'm going to title my whole EP, or no one's going to see it, or whatever. So what's the balance of, doing the release really the way that you want it to do and how you believe it should be listened to, versus taking those things with a grain of salt or trying to make the best decisions there, so yeah.
That's good. It's almost like it comes back to just the intent. If you have an intent at the beginning of the day, you can have that open-handed, but you can say like, I love this song, I love this melody, I love the way it flows in this manner, and you invite people into it, and you're like, I want to keep the integrity of X, Y, and Z. Other than that, go for it. Then I think it becomes more like a rework, and that's like the vision for what I want to do with it. Versus, I have this collection of compositions and sounds, and they've been inspiring to me, and I'm going to hand it to you, and I hope it inspires you to do whatever you will. And then to me, you could try to call it a rework, and it's justified to call it that, but I think it's equally justified just to say, this is brand new material based on the inspiration of these sounds.
Yeah. I think it gives some, at least for me, like it gives maybe some freedom too, right? When we work on these kind of collaborative tracks together, I don't know, I don't do this anymore now, but I think I feel like maybe the first couple times specifically in the world of, making ambient music and the people that we work with, like if something has kind of like remix attached to it, I don't know, I feel like there's almost like this pressure of like, oh, I have to like, the track has to be like kind of recognizable, or else it's like not going to be, it's not going to be like a good remix. And I think that's just a natural like nervousness maybe, right? You're taking someone else's work and they're trusting you. And but I love this thing that, that we have been able to this point to get to, I guess, working on each other's stuff of like, yes, creating something new, it has a new name. I feel like it kind of alleviates some of the pressure of like, oh man, like this track has to be like recognizable as like this other version. So I don't know. I like how that's kind of come together. I just feel like it kind of allows some more freedom there to maybe, you're not feeling so tied to like, I have to keep this melody in or this and that kind of thing, which is kind of cool.
Agreed.
Yeah. Ben, I'd love to hear more what's bouncing around in that brain of yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have summed it up really well. I mean, you don't want to let this dictate the artistic vision. And Mike, you gave a great example of your early years project where I think it was absolutely justified to make those calls, even though, yes, maybe some of the release radar algorithmic performance was lessened. That was actually the project that kind of woke me up to this kind of new place we're in, because I was like, hey, you've got a ton of followers. Why is no one getting piano and strings versions in their release radar? And I checked all my accounts are like nothing, and it was like, okay, something's going on. But all that to say, actually, that project has done really, really well, including those versions which didn't do so well on Release Radar. Because, if you get people listening to your music, if you get onto some decent playlists and do kind of the regular promotional side of things, radio will pick it up. Other algorithmic things on Spotify will pick it up. So this isn't saying that you are out of any algorithmic placements. It's saying, hey, Release Radar is not going to prioritize this. And so, I think kind of maintaining that artistic integrity, while also, I think from my side with my label head on, it's like, and with my artist head on, it's like, you've created some beautiful music. How can we make sure as many people as possible hear that beautiful music? And if that means making a call which doesn't impact the artistic vision of calling something a rework or a remix, and instead calling it a title that is maybe even kind of thematically linked to the original, I think that can be a really good option. And, actually, honestly, something we've done as a label for many, many years, as you guys know. And it just so happens that over time, that's become probably the best approach with the majority of cases.
Okay, this is kind of naive of me, Ben, but I do need your help, or if any of you knows it. My guess is that Ben knows it, but if any of you knows
with increasing my Spotify numbers overall. So need your help with that.
Just do the thing. Some various.
You just take care of that.
I've had 3 separate voice messages about that very specific topic over the last week. So just 2 of you are in this room.
Here we go.
This is life, right? This is what we do. Okay, so on Release Radar, to be honest, I don't listen to my Release Radar that often. I'm usually letting people out that I specifically want to listen to instead of letting it feed it to me, which is not the way that a lot of people listen to their streaming platform, and that's great. And I have no problem with the way I do it. I also love the way that everyone else does it. But for Release Radar, how long has it been? Is it since its inception, or is it kind of a more recent feature where once a song that is on the Release Radar has been listened to, that it falls off of the radar, that it is like you get one listen and then peace out? Is that a relatively new, because I know that was part of what the guy was commenting on, and I was like, man, because again, just correct me, but I felt like in the back of my head that Release Radar, for at least the artists that you're following, that there was like a song or a representative of songs from your release that would just show up on Release Radar for, I don't know, 4 weeks, something like that. Which again, like this is so just grasping at straws. I have no idea what I'm talking about, which is just kind of pitiful, seeing as how this is what I do with my time, and I make music for the people who listen on Release Radar. But all that to say, did that change recently where it is a one and done and it falls off and then good luck, you gotta do that? Or has that just kind of always been the thing and I just haven't paid attention?
I don't know how long it's been the case. I mean, at one point Release Radar was 1 week only. And then the next week, a whole bunch of new stuff comes. So it's actually relatively recent that if you didn't, within the last few years, that if you didn't listen to the thing the first week, it would still be there on Release Radar the next week.
Sure.
So I think the shift, if you like, now is if you, as a listener, listening to a track on Release Radar in the first week, in the second week, that track won't be there, but maybe something else from the release will be there, which wasn't potentially even pitched. So it's kind of it's more fluid now, which I think is quite good for artists, especially if your music performs relatively well. Because now as well, as you will have noticed, tracks from artists you don't follow do occasionally show up in Release Radar, but that works the other way around. Like our music goes into other people's Release Radar, especially week 2, week 3, if it performs well with your own audience. And so, and then even during the week, if you notice that, again, if you're not on Release Radar a lot, you probably wouldn't see this, but day by day, Release Radar changes the order, like relatively significantly. If you've listened to a track a lot, it kind of pushes it down a little bit and then surfaces something else, the cover image changes. So it's kind of, they're clearly experimenting with a lot of ways of getting people to listen to more music and to kind of to understand what you really, really like, so they can feed you more of that, and just trying to make it a more fluid and potentially interesting and more useful tool, both for listeners and for artists. So I definitely don't feel like this is all bad. I just feel like one has to be aware of it and then kind of make strategic and potentially some artistic shifts where necessary.
Yeah, and that's all really good. Thanks for clarifying that. As far as just even the response on the rework thing and all that, maybe this is just kind of a little sort of closing question. The idea of reworks, like I could see in the back of my head how one would, again, like just kind of gaming the system, where like the idea of a remix has a lot more to do with, I want a certain artist of a certain caliber or a certain audience size to remix a song so that, first of all, looks like I know what I'm doing, and then second of all, reaches to their audience and gives them a chance to be like, oh, I wonder who this artist is. Like I understand the kind of playing the system of that, again, which can be done nefariously or it can be done very very honestly, which is great. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to just create great music, I am just thinking through the idea of like how would it feel to just drop the idea of having to label something as a rework or a remix and just have a different art, like, to have two primary artists or three, whatever, on a song, and name it something different from the original. It's almost, to be honest, like when we do collab tracks, when we do collab songs with each other, I'll usually do like a song starter or, a handful of them, and then volley them over the net, and then somebody else does stuff and we volley back and forth a little bit. This kind of feels a little bit more like if I were to hand them, a finished song, in a sense, that's already been released. It's kind of the same sort of thing. It's just sort of a more realized thing. I've put more time into it. I've thought through the parts a little bit more. I've kind of, curated it a little bit more. But if we're doing a rework, like kind of, Kirk, what you were defining as it going beyond the just kind of tweaking a mix a little bit, but like really kind of upending it, that's kind of the same sort of thing that we do with our starters in the first place, right? Or at least I need to approach that mindset wise. Like, even though the song is finished and released, like I'm also cool with it just being mangled, in the best way possible by someone that I trust and someone that's going to breathe a whole new life into it. And so yeah, I think for me, it would just be in how that sort of thing gets communicated to people. And that's probably more of like a socials sort of thing, or, just making sure that all the metadata looks really good on that end. But yeah, I'm just kind of batting that around in my head a little bit. And yeah, like, how would you feel if someone put a gun to your head and said, if you cannot release anything ever again that says remix or rework on it, but of course you want to be working with them and you want to do those sorts of things with each other, like how would you be processing through that?
I mean, from my side, I can't remember the last time I did a remix or a rework and not retitle it, but I think personally I like the challenge of finding titles that link to the original, but like also honor the new track that has been created. So that, I guess, has been my mindset for a long time. I think there is a little bit of it.
Man, you're setting you're
accidental
the
front runner.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think for me, there's a couple of things though, because if you like, I go back to a release that Kirka and I did a few years ago called Transitions was the EP, but we did a track called Seek, and then Mike, you essentially reworked it,
Yep.
but we called it And Find, and we released it as a 2-track.
Yeah,
and
we're so clever. That was
and like how fun is that? But in doing that, you kind of find that link. You, in some senses, you are communicating to the audience that this is, to your listeners, that this is kind of connected. But the track that you created or that you reworked was substantially different in its style and everything like that. So it felt kind of legitimate to do that. I think there is a difference if you release an EP one year and then the next year you get a whole bunch of people to remix or rework it. Then I think that does maybe justify calling things reworks or remixes if you kind of want to put those two things together. But at the same time, I'm literally right now in the process of releasing what is essentially a rework EP. It's called Worlds Collide. It's under Antarctic Wastelands. The singles are releasing right now. And each one of those is a rework of one of my previous 2 EPs, Worlds Apart and Worlds Connected. But they're all got new titles. And all those titles refer back in some subtle way to the original track. But I would say that every one of those tracks, pretty much, every one of those tracks feels like a new thing that is worthy of, a new name and a new chance to be put in front of listeners, both in Release Radar, but also just, more broadly. So I don't know. I do think it comes down to like a mindset and an openness and just kind of shifting your artistic intentions around some of these things with that in mind, just kind of going with that flow and enjoying that as part of the creative process, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder if you guys have this occasional thought of when you're releasing something that has a rework, right? That has a completely new title. Do you ever hope or do you ever maybe get, I don't know, fear or nervous in some way, like you want people to make the connection that this is a rework of this track, but maybe that it's not necessarily that connection won't be made? Let's say if I have one of you guys do a rework and we give it a new name, and I am thinking to myself, okay, well, I hope that people know that it can like point back to this track, or I hope there's elements that come across that, it point like, right. So I think, and not in a sense of like, well, maybe there is some sense of, wanting, you want to have some sense of pride in that first piece that you created, and you want that to be showcased as well. But I think on the other side of that, there's also something kind of nice about presenting it as completely new. I think like the practice of doing it regularly kind of for me has taken away some of the concern of like, oh man, people need to know it was this track, or, it's like my track originally or whatever. Right. So I think, I don't know, for me, there's been many times where we make reworks. I know we all go through this, and probably all the artists who listen to this, right? You give your rework and you're like, well, I really hope that they like this. I don't know how I feel about it. I think I like it and I'm done with it. So here you go. But I think the practice of presenting something new that ultimately came from something you created on your own, kind of like, I don't know. And I feel like in some sense it brings like some beneficial like humility to the table as far as like how you're presenting with collaborators and other artists. And I feel like it's kind of it's here and there, maybe a gut check every now and then of like, okay, this is great. It doesn't have to be like, I'm the one who did this or whatever. We're like kind of like doing this together. So what are you guys feeling on that?
It feels way more open-handed, and it feels way more like there's this reciprocal generosity, like you said, the humility, which just feels like a safer vibe to create things. So I think it's great.
Yeah.
I still think remixes can be a valid thing, but it's almost like this is a whole different thing. But it's almost like a lot of it almost could happen behind the scenes, to where it's basically just like a collaboration, like Mike was saying, like it's a song starter, except it's a finished song that then becomes a song starter. And I think it's a great way to work, just because of the nature of the relationship and the freedom. And it could be an opportunity to have a story, and say that this is kind of how this happened, and you can take people behind the scenes and you could make it a thing. And I think you almost have to try to communicate it if you want that to be known, that like this is part of what makes it special, is because it's fragments of each other's work that turns into this new thing. Because a lot of times things are so different that you really wouldn't know unless someone told you that, hey, this came from this source material. And so I think it's fine to either not talk about it or to make it a story that you invite people in to where they're like trying to figure out which sample is the thing that came from the other thing.
Yeah. I think that's cool too, because I feel like there's an established like sense of trust between who, we're working with on this stuff, to where you can literally go, this is a, finished as much as I finished it piece, and like kind of trusting each other completely to take it and do whatever, the knowing that you're not going to send me something back and I'm going to be like, well, actually, to honor the original track, can you do this and this kind of thing, which is great. So it's kind of cool. It's great to me to kind of see like, kind of adapting to these best practices, but then they can also kind of like bring these kind of unexpected surprises as far as like, what does collaborating actually look like? What does releasing together look like? That sort of thing.
Yep.
I love what Kirk said about the stories behind the music, because I think we're all aware that posting a little bit more frequently to social media is probably a good thing. Having stories, even in pitching, is a good thing. Like, this stuff is kind of like, oh, it's free, like, content if you want. And I kind of hate that, but I also am like, but it's there. It's like, I should be doing more of that with my current release. I'm like, these have stories. Not only do the original tracks have stories, but the fact that the new ones are based on these, and like, okay, this is so beautiful what this person has added to the table, and like, it's so easy in so many ways to talk about it. So I guess it's also, it's a side benefit of this, is that there's a kind of encouragement to maybe share some of that more publicly, and just bring listeners along for the ride.
You should do that, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to hear some of those.
Can you do it for me too? No,
Yeah, that's what he meant. You should do it for everyone.
Exactly. You should do that for us.
It's probably an AI kind of thing which can just replace my face with your face. That it's just
it's coming, baby. It's there. Coming. I love it. Well, man, that was great. I had a whole other like second half of a music news thing, but we just went on this. We're gonna save that for
keep it in the can.
Next time, and that's
save it.
This really beneficial, and I think it's It went to a great place, and I think news that might, originally have caught somebody off guard and be like, oh, wow, that's quite a change. Like, I think, the best way to look at it is to look at it with this idea of like, okay, what are the creative possibilities of this? What are the ways that this can be something that allows me to be proactive instead of just like reactive mode? And I love that. Yeah, I just love what we were talking about. So it's great. You guys are great. Awesome. Well, until the next, we will wrap this episode of Music News All Ambientness. You guys are amazing. Thanks for your time.
Thanks
guys.
Thanks again for checking out the All Ambient podcast. We're really glad you're here. Make sure to visit us at all-ambient.com. We'll see you again next week. We still have a few not video podcast episodes to roll out, but there's not a ton of them left, and we will be full video in just a little bit. So thanks for flexing with us as we begin the transition. And most importantly, here's hoping that this music and the heart behind it makes your day and your life that much better. We'll see you next time.